Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where we're traveling a bit. This is clearly not the east coast of North America. We're in North Dakota right now at the Knife River Indian Village Historic Monument. And what you're looking at behind me is a field of midden piles. These are trash heaps from a Mandan and Hidatsa village right on the banks of the Missouri River, which is in front of me that way. Okay? Now, the Mandan and several other associated groups are a little bit different in culture from a lot of the, fully nomadic, live in teepees, use horses to hunt bison as their primary mode of subsistence, in that they have farming and agriculture as a huge percentage of their annual caloric intake. Okay? So when you're focused on farming, you're having a slightly different lifestyle than if you're fully nomadic and have to run with the herds. But if you're fully nomadic, have to run with the herds, and that's your everything, your housing is going to be very portable, very mobile, and that's where we get teepees from. But when you're living close to your fields, and you're going to invest the time and energy into building good, high-quality agricultural fields, you want to be by them and protect them for the majority of the year, definitely the growing season. Now, there is still some nomadic nature, right? And sometimes the best fields aren't the warmest places to spend winter. So, there's winter camps and other things like that that go along with this. But then you're going to repopulate that same area year after year for a long period of time to maintain those fields that you've invested so much work and energy into. And that leads to a more permanent type of housing being practical, and we call that the earth lodge. Now, earth lodges pop up in many cultures around the world. The ones built by the Mandan are very large compared to some others, and again, intended for frequent repopulation of the same site over decades. Okay? So we have a reconstructed one just a little bit back that way that I'd like to take you on a tour of, kind of show you the architecture, how it's put together, and a little bit of how the aspects of it relate to the lifeways. And I think these things are really fascinating and really illustrative of a people working with their landscape and their lifestyle in a very sophisticated way. The lighting in the earth lodge isn't the best, so I'm not talking a whole bunch about specific implements and artifacts and things like that, but we're going to do an overview of how it's put together, what it looks like, and how the different aspects relate to climate and lifestyle. This is the big reason that we're talking about earth lodges instead of teepees, right? So this is a traditional Three Sisters garden. There's many different, flavors and styles of putting these together across North America, this being one of them. So if you're not agricultural and you're fully nomadic, you need something more like a teepee in order to be able to get up and move and follow the game that you're hunting as your primary mode of subsistence. Okay? If you are building permanent gardens, permanent fields, farming, you need to stay close to your farm for the entire growing season. Now, yes, obviously, farmers go hunting, and hunters are perfectly happy planting some plants in spots that they visit once in a while, right? So these are not necessarily mutually exclusive things. But the style of the architecture that's going to dominate will reflect the dominant mode of living of the culture. Okay? There will always be an adaptation there. Many cultures have built tent-type structures. Many cultures have built earth lodge-type structures. And you have nomadicism in both sides, and you have somewhat settled or semi-nomadic habits in both sides, right? The Sami build small earth lodges at multiple points along an annual migration route, okay? But here, when we have a garden, and we know that most of the family is going to spend most of their time as close to this garden as possible, it makes a whole lot of sense to build a large, comfortable, relatively permanent home. Now behind us we have a large, full-scale reconstructed earth lodge. This is a really interesting type of structure that is found in many areas of the world. The far north of North America, the Sami use similar structures, but they're oval rather than round. And they are just wonderful, marvelous, cozy places to live and spend time. So I want to take you inside, around the outside a little bit, and inside, and show you how it's made and how it works. As we get a little bit closer to the lodge, we can see a bit more of the architecture. So right here we have the front door. You can see it's extended out, right? Extending a door out from a building like this gives you protection from wind and snow and water blowing in during a storm, right? If you just have, like in a modern house, you just have the wall, the door, and the outside. But when you have sort of a, for lack of a better word, a snorkel coming out here, right? The only way that wind can blow snow in there is directly through that hallway. Okay, and it's just an open hallway, but as you'll see in a minute, there's a bison hide that is acting as a door between the edge of that hallway, porch, whatever you want to call it, and the interior of the lodge. You can see that this is built with, very simple but very effective architecture. We just have a post that comes up to a Y, and that Y supports a cross beam or a lintel. Then there's another layer of sticks going across to make a roof, and then you have sod on top, but these three logs right there are preventing it from washing off the end. Okay, and then the wall is made up of split planks or half logs. Okay, you'll see these things. You'll see similar structural components as we go inside. It's all supported in basically the same way. And then here on the outside, holding up the soil so that all the soil doesn't just slump off the roof, you have, again, another row of forked sticks supporting crossbeams. The lighting inside of the Earth Lodge was really poor for filming. And that, combined with the fact that when you're inside something, it's hard to get the full view of what you're inside, I wanted to come after the fact here and build a model of the frame of this style of Earth Lodge so that it's a little easier to see and understand what you're actually looking at when we're filming inside. So the basic structure is a square of tall central posts, a ring of shorter posts, and this is about to scale relative to these, okay? And then sticks around supporting the earthen structure. So I'm going to go through step by step and build this in the way it would have been built. So the first thing we need to do is set up the central square of sticks. Now the documentation on this style says that for this central square, it was preferred to have posts that were cut off at a side branch. So that side branch provides extra support for the cross pieces, okay, an extra natural buttress like that. So these are going to go in. All of this has already been fitted. Dab a little wood glue on there. There is quite a bit of joinery in these earth lodges. They're very sophisticated little structures, or not so little structures. The smallest ones would be 20 or 30 feet in diameter. The largest ones could have 6 poles in the middle, and thus would be an oval lodge overall. Could be 60 feet.
Some of them were made very hastily for winter dwellings, winter villages that would only be occupied for a few months. Those were on the smaller end of the spectrum, both because they were only temporarily occupied and because
Less room to heat.
Less room to heat, exactly. And some of them in winter villages had small add-ons. Might be a full-sized lodge, but then have a small add-on that you could get to by a covered hallway. And then in really bitter cold winter days, that small, everybody would just pile into the smaller, easier to heat lodge. Save on firewood, and to have more people taking care of the fire tending duties all in one spot on the most bitter cold days.
Makes sense.
So we have our posts set in the ground, and these are traditionally just dug into post holes. And that's kind of the lifespan determining factor of these structures. They would only be up for 10 to 15 years because in that time frame the bases of these posts rot out. It's especially true since in the plains the only tree large enough to make these big central posts is cottonwood. And cottonwood is a very rot-prone wood. So cottonwood in direct ground contact, you get a decade, and that's about it, and then they'd have to be rebuilt. But there is some joinery here. So if you look at these, we have the crotch and the supporting natural buttress, and then it's set down. There's a groove cut in the top of each of these posts. Okay? And that fits the cross pieces in this first tier are squared off. Okay, so let me make sure I've got this incorrectly. Yep. And all of this joinery would be done on the ground. And everybody would get together and hoist it all up into the air. And the accounts of the hoisting say that while women were primarily responsible for the design, construction, and subsequent ownership of the lodge, when it came time to hoist all of these heavy beams, everybody would come together. And there was a lot of male participation there. And the way you would get these up would be to take a forked stick, put it underneath, then have multiple people lifting it up like that. And then they would also be supported with safety ropes while that was happening. Okay, we have our first two cross pieces in. Now, model making is different from doing this in real life. In real life, you would fit all of this stuff on the ground, and then since it's a pole building construction, you would have a little bit of wiggle to make sure it, something shifted. You could jimmy it into place and adjust with how you pack the soil in. Here in a model, I'm fitting these into a very rigid wood base. So I'm not going to do all the fitting at once. But the next piece is going to be perpendicular cross pieces. And while the first tier is squared off, the second tier is rounded over. And that has to do with how the rafters are laid in. Then also, this will get a groove in the bottom here and a matching groove in the top there, so it all locks together like that. But in order to be able to do that, I need this to be solid and that glue hard. Here these top pieces are all carved out. So you can see there's notches in the bottom of the cross log and receiving notches in the top of the log onto which it sets. Okay, and it's the same on both sides. So that's how that final bit of joinery goes together. And then you can see the tops of these are rounded off nice, because when we talk about putting the roof on this, there's going to be diagonal pieces coming in such as that, and they need to be able to sit on a neat receiving surface. Okay, they can't sit on a sharp angle. So there would be there if I wasn't clumsy, and there. And then we're going to get the outer perimeter posts put in. Now those are all going to be Y sticks, such as this. Now there are several ways that these were put in. In some cases they would be a Y stick like this. In other cases it might be a vertical end stick with a U cut in the top to receive the runners. Now for ease and simplicity with this model, I'm going to use Y sticks, and I'll get them whittled and debarked, and then set them into these side holes, okay? And that's going to be a very long, fiddly process because each of these holes is going to have to be drilled in and rasped out. All of these forked uprights are in place. Now again, sometimes natural forks could be used, other times just a straight post with a U-cut in the top can be used. And then after this, the next step is to put the runners all the way around the perimeter. Now I started with these two, and you can see they are individually shaped with these angle cuts, okay? So this way, when they insert into these notches, right, this one is locked in that position, and then this one, because it's hitting both ends, and then this one mates with it perfectly, okay? And then to put the next piece in, we will do the same thing. Just kind of mark it there. Now I'm going to trim that off. Okay. So again, it's meshed right in that way. Now get another little stick and a slightly thicker one. Kind of estimate how that's going to go. There's really a genius way to fit these together. Okay. It's a little too shallow. And I'll strip the bark off of this later. I grabbed willow just so that part would be easy. Still a little too shallow. This isn't bark stripping time of year, but still not hard to take the bark off a couple little sticks for a little model project. There. Okay. So now that will fit against this. And the whole thing is wedged in so tightly, you know, yes, it's small and I can dislodge it, but once these wrap all the way around, okay, and are attached, in my case I'm going to glue all these in, of course, but in a real one, these would be fit all the way around, and then the next step is planking against them. So we have split pieces of log that then get leaned across these to form the base of the outside wall. Okay? And then the pressure from these, yeah, I'm not doing it real careful right at this moment, right? But then the pressure from these keeps everything jammed into place. Okay? So that's the next bit of structure. Now I'm not going to plank all the way around, or you'd never be able to see the joinery that we so carefully replicated in here. And before I do any of this and attach any of this permanently, one of the internal features, and I'm doing this out of order, this would be a last step in the real McCoy, but one of the internal features that's really interesting and totally ingenious is the windshield. So the fire goes in the middle of this square. That's where the central fire is. This hallway is the door in. So you wouldn't want a blast of air blowing in the hallway when the door's open. The door would hang right here. You wouldn't want a blast of air going all the way into the fire. So we have this palisade wind block that fits in that way, blocking the wind from getting all the way to the fire. Now again, in the real McCoy, this palisade would be pretty much the very last thing that you build. But here, I'm going to glue this in right now before I do any of the rest of this, just because my fiddly little hands won't be able to get into that fiddly little space if I plank all of this up. Right? So I'm going to do this out of order for that reason. But remember, in the real thing, you can stand up underneath these poles, so there's plenty of room for humans to carry materials in and work inside of that. Now, the direction of this palisade and of the opening, the documentation on these describe these being faced in different directions and designed specifically for different members of community, representing their role in the community and the religious life of the community. So there isn't a certain direction that these always face, and I suspect there's not a certain direction that these palisades are always arranged. However, I am replicating the one at the museum. So we're just going to go with it, and this is how theirs was set up, so we are going to match theirs. The thing that came out a little bit counterfactual here is the ends of these logs should not be sticking up. But at the scale that we're working at, I mean, the sticks have to be big enough to be durable if it gets bumped with something moving it around, and large enough to manipulate, and yeah, they're a little bit out of scale. But that's okay. Other than that, this looks really nice, and it sets up the next stage, which is to take, let me just grab this, to take a set of sticks and lay them up like this as rafters. The rafters are finished being laid in here, and you can see how you can see the purpose of these rounded edges on these top beams, because here on the corner they just roll up over and come into that corner. And these would just be cut to length and whatever needed to be done to get them to fit in and close off this section of roof. And then if I spin it around, you can get a good sense of how all of it comes together. And with additional rafters on all four sides, that forms the smoke hole in the middle, which would be where the fire goes right here in the middle of the initial square. Okay? So all of the documentation for this comes from two sources. One is the Agriculture of the Hidatsa Indians, and that document focuses on agriculture, but talks a lot about how the other structures fit together with the agricultural system and the life ways in greater context. And the second is the Hidatsa Earth Lodge, which doesn't talk much about agriculture, but talks about this structure at length and all of its variations and forms. And some of the decisions I made in modeling here were for ease of modeling, because what you can do at this scale with teeny tiny little, slightly bigger than toothpicks, isn't the same as this types of joinery and fit up that you can do with, a full-sized building. So my model is bits and pieces of a couple of different styles of Earth Lodge all combined into one model. But the documentation, those books, have all of it and all of the context to all of the things. Now, these are available on my Patreon, and when I take books and put them up, I'm not just putting up a scan of the book. I'm re-editing it so that all of the text is type so it prints well, and updating the photos as best as I can, trying to edit and improve the photos so that they print as legibly as humanly possible with whatever starting material I have. The Agriculture of the Hidatsa is up now. The second one I am working on, doing all of that editing and tweaking too, but I'm not 100% sure of its copyright status. It is findable, but for another couple of years, I'm not 100% sure of its copyright status. It will enter public domain regardless in 3 or 4 years. I think it's public domain now, but I need to verify that. So as soon as I verify that, it will be up, and I will go back to this video and edit out this little blurb about how it's not quite up yet. And then I'll just say both of them are up. But for right now, if you're watching this in real time, agriculture is up, Earth Lodge is pending further research on its copyright status. So, you've seen the model, you've seen all of this structure. Let's go back and stand inside the interior of the real thing and look at that. Right as we get into the lodge, the door opens. You can see Renee holding the buffalo hide door to let a little bit of light in because it is not well lit in here. But the first thing that we see is a windbreak. So when the doors open, the wind is coming in and hitting this windbreak to keep everything from blowing inside. Here we're looking right in the middle of the lodge with the central feature being a fire pit, and this painted robe that you see there is the backside of that windbreak we were just looking at. Now if I scan up with the camera, you can see how it's built. Up there we have an opening in the top. Now this reconstructed lodge, that opening in the top is a skylight so that it's an enclosed space since this is a museum site. But in actual use, that would be simply an open vent for the smoke to go out. And then in the middle of this lodge, there are 4 posts here that are notched at the top with logs notched into them. Okay? And then around the edge, we have the same structure. A log with a notch in the top and then horizontal stringers. Okay? That goes all the way around. How many of these you're going to use would depend on how big a lodge you're building. There is a way of building this style of lodge with, instead of 4 posts here and then stringers around them, you could have a single post right up the middle where the fireplace is, and then obviously you'd have to put a smoke hole somewhere else. Then when we look at the walls over here, you can see you have split planking that is leaned from this lintel down to the ground, and that's solid. That's what's holding the dirt up. And then likewise, from these upper pieces, okay, we have some supporting logs which go across both the lower stringers and the upper stringers, and then meet with cut ends right at the smoke hole. Okay, and then they filled in behind those with small stick wattle, and then again outside of that you have the sod, which is the exterior of the building, and also a lot of the structure too. That's what's going to shed the water. That's what's going to keep it dry. That's what's going to preserve things in here. Now, it's also really interesting if I scan over here, there is a hole in the floor with a log ladder, and that is your root cellar. Okay, so right here is your refrigerator, and right there's your kitchen, and here they've done a nice job with putting a corded ceramic pot in there, which is what food would have been cooked in most of the time. Before we leave this topic, I just want to talk a little bit about the exterior roofing, the sealing of it and putting down the sod. And that's always a difficult thing, and different cultures have dealt with this different ways. You have to keep the water out, but you also have to have something that can breathe. Because, the floor of this is earth. You're going to be cooking. You're going to have a fire in there. It has to breathe. It has to live, right? So the 2 things that are typically used are worldwide, the two solutions to this tend to be thatch and bark. East Coast and in the far north tends to be bark. This one, the answer was thatch. So if we look here at the section where I finished all of the rafters, the wooden planks would have thatch laid over it, and then sod, and that's it. And then another row of these forked sticks is set up along the side to keep it from sliding off. Okay? The rafter section is a little bit more elaborate. So perpendicular to the lay of these rafters, there's a layer of willow branches. And you could see that in some of the clips when we were inside. You could see those willow branches sticking through. And then the willow branches had thatch on top of them, and then a layer of sod across the entire thing. Now, again, the documentation on this talks about the thatch being left a little bit back from the edge of the smoke hole for obvious flammability reasons. So the sod would come all the way to the top of the smoke hole without the thatch laying over it. And, you know, thatch is grass. Grass underneath sod is not a real long-lived situation. But again, the weak point in this particular design is the fact that these poles are a rot-susceptible wood. You know, cottonwood is a very rot-susceptible wood. And these main posts would rot out at the base faster than anything would go wrong with the roof. So the thatch in this circumstance was adequate because the weak link down here was weaker than the weak link of the thatch. And that's a difference in engineering that we have to get our brains around as modern people looking back at these, that you don't need, it's foolish. It's not you just don't need it, it's actively foolish to invest time and energy in a 50-year roof on a 10 to 15-year structure. Right? That's just silly. Sometimes a designed weakness is the best way to go when it's well thought out and it fits within the context of the structure that you're building. Okay? So I wanted to talk about that a bit. Now, the replica that we were touring, I had a chance to talk to the ranger there in the office, and he said that their roof was roofing rubber underneath the sod. They went for the modern roofing rubber, and however they've set the poles, they've done it in such a way that they expect it to be a 50-year building. And he said they had engineers come in and design a replica so that it would be true to form as much as possible, but was intended to be a 50-year building. I think he said it was 20 plus years old at the time that we were touring it, so it's held up very, very well. So I don't know how they modified their foundation posts, but probably set them. I would have, if I was an engineer thinking that through, I'd probably be thinking concrete with a bracket on top to keep them up out of the ground. You know, something along those lines. I didn't ask him that. I don't know exactly what their solution was. But they have used, they're in the park, they have used modern materials and modern engineering to make a version of this traditional structure that, you know, isn't going to be rebuilt every 10 to 15 years. So, I think it's really interesting. I think these types of structures are just absolutely fascinating. I love them. While I was up teaching in Maine, I had a chance to spend a week in a earth lodge that was based on the Sami style of earth lodge construction. And that was just a wonderful, joyful experience getting to stay in one of these things. They're cozy, they're warm in the winter, they're cool in the summer. They're just beautiful structures. And they fit so well with certain lifeways that this is something that I think we should have on our radar. This is something we should have in our repertoire. This is something we should have in our thought process, building things like this, because they work. Just because it's an older technology does not mean that it is no longer an appropriate technology. In for many circumstances, it's very, very appropriate and lovely. So I hope that you found some interest in this. I hope that these lifeways and discussing these lifeways is interesting to you. If you like this sort of travel video where we go and see things that aren't limited just to the Mid-Atlantic states, we have the Patreon, and we would love to see you there. Every little bit helps because everything we're doing is self-funded. So, hope to see you there. Hope to see you again on the channel. But most of all, I hope that you have a blessed day.